Whether it's bad planning, bad luck, bad timing, or bad inventions, well-intentioned bad decisions have plagued history for thousands of years. Welcome to Historic Hindsight. Hello and welcome to another episode of Historic Hindsight. I'm John, that's Tom, and today we're going to talk to you about the Boston Massacre.
That's right, Johnny, the Boston Massacre. And if you got my memo on the Facebookers before hearing this or watching this, I promise that we are not going to make any kind of comparison to what happened here to today.
Well, I mean, it's a completely different time, so I'm sure
Absolutely.
As we've been taught our entire lives, Tommy, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. I'm sure we learned from history, and now we're not going to repeat anything like this. So it's great.
Yeah, you are doomed to repeat it, and I promise that we totally learned from this. Now, if you're sitting at home going, well, why are we learning about the Boston Massacre? We learned about that in the damn their schools. Well, I did a preliminary look at this, like on YouTube and some other sources and stuff. And while doing research, dear God, like what we're taught in school is not what happened. And then what's actually out there is so full of like speculation and misinformation, because apparently when you get a crowd of 300 to 400 people together with differing viewpoints, maybe what actually happened is a little obscured.
Yeah, it's that whole side A versus side B. The truth is somewhere in the middle. Like each side is going to exaggerate, and who knows what they're really, how much truth is in the things that they're saying, or if it's just to make the other side look like they were at fault.
At fault, yeah. And even today with like video cameras everywhere on everybody's phone, and we get clear video footage of events, there is still speculation as to what actually happened.
Well, I mean, the leading comments in all of those videos is always, well, I'd like to see what happened leading up to the start of this video where this horrific thing happened.
Yeah. We'll get there.
And what did those people do 12 years ago? I mean, to deserve this, but whatever. In any case, I'm guessing the same thing happened back in the day.
Well, that defense, damn it, Johnny.
Anyway, okay, jumping the gun. Let's dive in. We are heading back to the Boston Massacre. What year are we and where are we going?
Okay,
I'm guessing Boston.
Yeah, we are in Boston, Massachusetts. So the glorious education system would teach us that this was a definitive point in pre-Revolutionary War history that sparked the Americans' freedom when the British redcoats mercilessly shot into an unarmed crowd, and that this would spark the revolution. But Johnny.
So this happened in 1974, 1975.
You mean 1774?
17, yeah, 17. Whatever century we're in.
Yes. No, it actually happens on March 5th, 1770, 6 years before the Declaration of Independence. So right off the bat, I don't know if you could call it the definitive thing that pushed us over the edge when it took another 6 years.
I mean, that's quite the gap in time. Like, that's a presidential election and then 2 more years.
And then 2 more, yeah. The Boston Massacre would occur in Boston, Massachusetts. It would happen on March 5th, 1770, and it would start, in a very brief, real quick synopsis, with a group of British soldiers that would ultimately fire into a crowd of protesters, and ultimately killing 5 and wounding an additional 6. And by ultimately killing 5, even these numbers are obscured because 3 died on the scene. 1 would die a day later. One would die several weeks later. And then 1 would die like 10 years later and blame the death on this event. But really?
That's quite the long, unless your wound got reopened and you're going to blame it on that, and then it got infected and you died or whatever, 10 years, the day later, fine. A week or 2 later, you're going to succumb to your injuries. I can get with that. 10 years later? That's a little extreme, even for me.
A little bit. So I am going to paint a full picture. This is my goal for today's episode. I want to give both sides a due credit, which I don't think our education system does a very good job of that.
Well, of course
I do want to give both sides due credit.
Which, by the way, a quick plug for a book that has nothing to do with this. Lies My Teacher Told Me is a
Great book.
fantastic book that kind of breaks down the common myths we're taught and what actually happened. But in any case, let's do that for the Boston Massacre for everybody. So
We are going to
get
do
rid
that.
of the lie, because I don't know much about it except, like you said, it was like sort of spurned on the Revolutionary War, and some of those
soldiers fired
bad
into a crowd.
redcoats killed some innocent Americans. Like, that's what I
Yep.
know about it. They massacred them.
It's a massacre. It is a massacre. So I got to paint the picture of the background that leads up to this. So in the 1760s, the Crown began levying taxes on the United States colonies, or not United States at this point, but on the colonies, because, well, there was that whole French and Indian War, or what really was the 7 Years' War, but the French and Indian War is just a minor part of it, but because we're Americans, we only care about the French and Indian part.
Of course.
There's a war. The Crown spent a lot of money protecting the colonies from the evil, dirty French.
That was nice of them.
And the Indians, because it was their fault that that they were here before we got here. It's their fault.
I mean, they literally had lived on our God-given country for thousands of years, likely.
Yep, and it's their fault. Now, the Crown wanted to get some of that money back, so they started levying taxes. Now, these taxes were not popular, and ultimately they would lead with the Townshend Act of 1768, which really started pissing off colonists. And by colonists, I mean rich landowners, because it was really only the rich landowners that were being affected by this, because some of these taxes were something called the Stamp Act. And what the Stamp Act was...
So they went ahead and taxed the people that mattered.
Yes, they did. The Stamp
That was
Act
their mistake.
Basically, what it did is it made that the colonies had to import all papered goods from England, and that all papered goods would have to be stamped. Tax. So playing cards, here's your stamp, tax it. Document of the deed, stamp that, tax it. Newspaper, you want a newspaper? Stamp that, tax it.
How hefty was the tax? That's crazy. That's a lot.
So, the newspaper owners were obviously pissed because all their paper now had to come from London and was taxed.
Right.
The landowners were pissed because now all their deeds and contracts would have to be coming from London and taxed. Your commercial goods, your Walmarts of the day, so to speak, they're pissed because, well, when they want to sell that deck of playing cards, it has to come from London.
Right. Well, and any receipts that people want because people were giving receipts for goods that they bought, they have to. It's on tax paper.
On paper, yeah, a receipt.
The receipts became more expensive because I can understand why people are mad, but people never like taxes. Like, when have they ever?
They also imposed a series of excise tax on any goods imported from England. So if you wanted your tea, there's a tax to it. You want your sugar, there's a tax to it. Now, if the colonists were smart, they would start taking that opportunity to start producing some of the stuff more locally, right? If I make a silver set of dishes here in the colonies, I don't have to pay the tax. If I import it, I pay the tax. So logically, if you were smart, this should have spurred small business.
Unfortunately, all of the land was taken up by that super lucrative cash crop that was run and operated by slavery. And so they didn't do that, I'm guessing, right?
So needless to say, the landowners weren't super happy. The rich and elite weren't super happy. And Boston was one of the commercial hubs of the colonies. It was one of the biggest hubs. So Boston became a hotbed of, we don't really want these taxes. So the Crown thought it would be a good idea to send 1,000 redcoats to Boston. And by the Crown, I mean the governor of Boston requested this.
Yeah.
Because there was unruly mobs.
You need to get your protection sent to help deal with those mobs.
We need some way to police these people.
Yeah.
And so the Crown thought it would be a good idea to send 1,000 redcoats from Ireland that were just dealing with all the Irish rebellions, because they're used to dealing with rebellions, right?
Experienced.
And we'll send them to Boston. But what they do is they don't pay these soldiers very well. So these soldiers that come over now have issues of where do we house, especially the officers, where do we house the officers? So the officers are now being housed in private houses of the colonists who don't have a say in it. It's like, hey, rich landowner, we're going to go ahead and shop up this captain. You got to give him a room, rent free.
Side question: there's some sort of amendment that says you can't do that anymore, right?
That doesn't exist yet. That doesn't exist. Another big.
Of course it doesn't exist, but in any case, yeah.
And another big problem with it is that these soldiers, the privates, weren't paid very well, and so they started moonlighting. So they started getting jobs,
Ah,
odd and ends here and there, running security, being a bartender, what have you. And that started having issues with, the local Joe Smo, who's 17-year-old, and he just wants a little job, and he can't get his job as a Walmart bagger because of damn British redcoat.
they took our
They took our
jobs.
jobs. So hostilities are rising. Pair that up with the fact that, all these taxes are coming without any real representation of the colonists, which by British Parliament law was technically illegal, but it's the crown and we don't care.
And also, it's the British. Like they've gone around the past several hundred years doing things that are technically illegal.
Yeah. So this paints the picture. We're in Boston now, 1770. The soldiers have been here for a little bit now, and they're stealing jobs. They're making, you rent out a room to them for free. Hostilities are there. Like the average person on the street is like, ugh, look at that garish guy in his red coat with his musket.
Right. Yeah. You don't see them and think local hero, someone here to protect me. You see him and think, oh, look at that asshole.
Look at that asshole.
That's where we are with kind of the common folk versus this. Basically, it's an occupied city at this point, right? Like
it's an occupied.
They have 1,000 at this point troops occupying the city.
At this point, you could call it an occupied city. So enter a private Hugh White. Hugh White, on the evening of March 5th, 1770, is standing guard out in front of the front steps of the Boston Custom House on King Street, which is now State Street in Boston. He was there guarding the King's gold at the Custom House. So, just think of a bank. It's like a bank.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's like the King's not just storing gold there. I'm guessing it was his gold to be spent for.
It also it's probably also part of the tax revenue that they're fighting against. I mean, because this is the King's money, so I imagine that some of that gold is actually levied taxes.
That would make sense.
So he's standing out in front of there, doing his job. He's some punk kid, just I don't want to be here. Daddy made me come from Ireland, and now I'm gonna sit here and guard this shack for whatever reason.
It was a great opportunity to,
think of any security guard that you find at any store. And picture that guy standing out in front of this custom house.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a wig maker's apprentice. Wig maker. This is the jobs that I'm going to describe to you guys are so archaic and awesome.
I mean, there's still wig makers. It's just slightly a more specialized profession to something that matters instead of these ridiculous, pompous, white, curly.
It mattered back then, Johnny. Things. That was a status symbol. Those wigs were a status symbol. The wig maker's apprentice by the name of Edward Garrick, who is anywhere between 13 years old and 17 years old, depending on the records you read and the reports that you read. And this becomes important because there are basically two common stories that happen, and they're a little bit different from each other.
So I'm going to say he's about 15 and a half.
Probably. So at some point, wig maker apprentice Edward Garrick gets into a confrontation with Private Hugh White. Like I said, there are two stories. I'll give you the first one. The first one is that he's around 13 years old. He is working at the wig maker's shop. He leaves said shop to confront a Captain John Goldfinch, who also might be a lieutenant, again, depending on the records that you read. Take all of this with a grain of salt. And he confronts him because Captain Goldfinch has not paid his bill to his master. You have not bought said white garish wig that you're wearing. Now, little bit known to Garrick, he actually has paid for the wig and said, I pay for that wig.
That's you collected your fees. I don't know you shit.
Private Hugh White has overheard this altercation and gets upset. How dare you talk to a gentleman in such way? You wig makers of who are you? You wig maker's apprentice. You are a 3 talking to an 8. You cannot do that.
And a child at that. Watch how you speak to your elders.
Elders, right? So Hugh White gets into a confrontation with Edward Garrick. Slurs are thrown at each other. Garrick pokes Hugh White in the chest, which even now today, go up to one of the Queen's guards and poke him in the chest and see what happens. What happens is they take the butt of their rifle, or musket in this case, one of these guys, not one of these guys, it would have been a brown bass, but whatever, takes the butt of his musket and goes kaplow and plows Garrick upside the head.
Yeah, they're going to plant you right on your ass.
Garrick is hit in the head. He screams out in pain. Several onlookers see this and are enraged and begin throwing snowballs, rocks, snowballs with ice, at
Snowballs with
Private White.
rocks. Yeah.
Rocks, bottles. They start throwing shit at Private White and threatening him and saying, "What are you gonna do? Shoot us?"
Oh yeah.
That becomes a common theme in this whole thing.
It's like the man who was stabbed 17 times who reportedly told his stabber, "What are you gonna do? Stab me?"
Stab me?
As a matter of fact, I am because no, in any case.
Yeah, because he did. Yeah. Now, story 2 is very much the same, except instead of being around 13, he's closer to 17, and instead of coming out of the wig maker shop, he comes out of the pub across the street. There is a pub. It's Boston in the 1700s. There are pubs everywhere. He comes out of this pub. He's a little inebriated, sees a red coat, standing guard, walks up to him in a drunken stupor, gets into an argument where, again, he pokes him in the chest, gets clubbed. Now, that story,
can I guess which side is which story? Because I think I might have it figured out.
The British side might be the whole drunken coming out of a bar thing.
Might be that. And this kid was 17, by the way, which is practically a man.
Yeah,
he was not a 12, 13, 14-year-old child who had heard his parents disparage and talk bad about all the British soldiers in town, and it was just repeating things that he learned from home. He's not that.
No, he's not
a man, basically, and he was drunk.
And then in that story, after he gets clubbed, all of his drunken friends come out and start throwing the beer bottles and snowballs and all that stuff.
So not just angry onlookers. It was basically a pub fight.
It was a pub fight. Yeah, it was a pub fight.
That's all.
Now this crowd begins gathering around Private White and threatening him, saying, "What are you gonna do? Shoot? Fire a gun! Fire a gun!" And somewhere in the city, somebody thought it'd be a good idea to bring more people to the crowd by ringing the church bells.
There we go.
At this time, it signals fire. So when people hear church bells, when it's not Sunday and it's not church time, they go, "Oh shit, the city's on fire," and they begin to run. A crowd of 50 guys led by Crispus Attucks, or Attucks. He is a mixed race former slave. Also, he's like half African-American, half Native American, I think.
Okay.
He's a former slave. He is the head of this group of 50 people coming on. He joins the crowd, and they decide that the best course of action here is to calm things down by throwing more snowballs and ice balls and rocks, and beer bottles, and
we're not looking to calm things down, Tommy. We got some excitement going on in Boston in 1760 or 70, whatever
70, yeah. White would then retreat back to the steps of the custom house, where he, it's probably his best bet of safety, where inside he has one of the runners of the custom house seek assistance from the officer of the watch, which is at a nearby barracks for the 29th Regiment of Foot that were stationed there. That officer that he would seek help from would be a Captain Thomas Preston, who would dispatch himself, a non-commissioned officer who was a Corporal William Wems, and a Private Hugh Montgomery, John Carroll, William McCauley, William Warren, and Matthew Kilroy. And damn it, there's a lot of Williams in that company. Like, Will, shoot, which one?
Willie 1, Willie 2, Bill, William, Billy.
So when
that's probably why there's so many nicknames for William.
Or Will.
Because there were so damn many of them. They're like, oh, well, all right, you go by William, you go by Will, you go by Willie, and now we're out. There's still 3 more. All right, we'll do Bill, we'll do Billy, and Billum. I don't know.
Billum, Bobby Joe.
Billiam.
When these reinforcements of 7 men would arrive, they would find White surrounded by, at this time, nearly 300 men.
I mean, the whole damn city, right?
Pretty much. All of whom are throwing shit at White, screaming at him to fire his musket.
I love the idea of people being like, "Oh shit, there's a fire! I gotta go." They run out. And they're like, "Oh, no fire! What's going on here? Oh, look at all this crowd!
Yeah,
what are we doing? Oh, we're throwing things at them. All right, I guess. Like, I've been pretty mad at these guys for a while, so I'll throw shit. Yeah, fire your gun. I don't care. Do what you want. Here's a snowball with a rock in it, you asshole."
Captain Preston would push his way through the crowd and forms a semicircle around the steps of the customs house. This is important. He places himself at the front of that semicircle. So, circle of guys, he's at the front.
Right at
so if they were to fire,
cornerstone.
If they were to fire, he's in front of them. That's important. When he gets there, a bookseller by the name of Knox grabs Preston by the shoulder and says, "For God's sakes, take care of your men. If they fire, you must die." Captain Preston responds with, "Yeah, I'm aware of it. Fucking crowd of 300 guys. We have single-shot muskets with bayonets." Yup.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Yeah, it's ants attacking the termite again. It's like, yeah, you're going to get a few, but you're going to get overrun if you're not careful.
and keep in mind, this is 8 guys with 300, at least 300 people in front of them, all of which are yelling at them, all of which are throwing shit at them.
Shit, yeah.
And like, it's not even like the storybooks say snowballs, and it's not like, I have to be clear, it's not just snowballs. It's snowballs, it's rocks, it's ice, it's beer bottles, it's clubs. They're throwing shit.
Yeah, here's the thing. They are not in the field somewhere having a snowball fight. They are downtown Boston, Massachusetts, which at this time, I'm guessing what, cobblestone roads, dirt, gravel everywhere.
Yeah.
So they're scooping shit up off of the ground with that. And yeah, it's going to be about 50 to 60% snow. And the rest of it's going to be rocks and dirt and pebbles and glass.
And whatever else they happen to have. Now, Preston does the sane and calm and reasonable things and orders his men to fix bayonets and load their muskets.
Right. Yeah, well, you have to prepare to keep the peace. And nothing says I'm prepared to keep the peace like arming your weapons and standing in front of a loud, angry crowd.
Now, shortly after this whole order to load arms and fix bayonets,
I also, real quick, I'm sorry, I just really like the idea of the officer telling these 8 men in front of these 300 people to start fixing their bayonets and loading their guns while all of these people are watching them do it.
And not doing anything to stop it.
And they're like, yeah, this isn't going to matter, bud.
Fire! What you going to do? Fire? Oh, you're loading. Fire anyways!
Yeah, they didn't give a shit.
You can't kill all of us.
Yeah. They didn't give a shit about that. Come at me, bro.
Shortly after this order was given, an innkeeper by the name of Richard Palms, who was carrying a cudgel, aka a club, walked right up to Captain Preston and asked if the muskets were loaded. Yeah, you didn't just see us do this?
I mean,
it's not like we loaded them in secret.
Well, he's probably like, "Oh, sorry, I was standing in the back. I don't know. There's murmurs of it. I didn't hear everything." So, like, are they good to go, or what are we doing?
Yeah. Now, Preston replied that yes, they were indeed loaded, but they would only fire if he'd ordered it, and he was not likely going to do that as he was standing in front of them.
Which makes sense, yeah.
I'm not going to order them to fire the guns if I'm standing in front of them, and right now I'm standing in front of them so that they don't fire the damn guns.
Yeah, and they understood the deadly accuracy of these these muzzle loaders,
these smoothbore muskets. Yeah. Now, shortly after asking him if he's loaded, the general story goes that somebody in the crowd threw something that was heavy enough, hard enough that it hit Private Montgomery in the head, knocking him down to the ground.
It was one of those snowballs we were talking about.
They
scooped up a cobblestone and covered it lightly in snow and then chucked it at some dude's head.
This forced Private Montgomery to drop his musket. Private Montgomery attempts to grab the musket and stand up, at which point Richard Palms, innkeeper Palms, takes his cudgel and whacks him with it.
Wait, the dude who just got hit in the head?
Yeah, the dude that just got
again?
Yeah, it gets hit again.
Oh man,
he's
Captain definitely going to have to
Preston,
be out for 2 to 4 weeks on concussion protocol.
Well, Captain Preston goes, "What are you doing? You can't just hit our people." At which point, Palms swings at Captain Preston, barely misses Captain Preston's head, and then hits him in the shoulder.
Oh, oof. If he would have taken him out, those guns would have never fired, right?
Well,
so they'll fire on my command.
Well, Private Montgomery, and keep in mind, at this point, up to this point, all the shit's being thrown. We now have a guy on the ground who's been hit by something so hard that he got knocked on the ground.
Likely bleeding.
He's now been hit again, and the same guy's also hit.
Yeah.
Captain Preston.
I mean, it sounds to me like it's about 0.33% of these people that are bad right now.
Why
are they punishing the rest of them?
While all this is going on, Attucks is reportedly also at the tip of a bayonet saying, "Shoot me."
I mean,
Who's the leader of this crowd?
yeah, that's what really, that's what you want in a leader, especially in some sort of uprising or protest or riot. I guess not riot. Like if it might come to blows, you want some guy that's just gonna be like,
Like,
all right,
do
fucking
it.
do it. What do you
Now,
got for me?
while Palms is swinging his club randomly at people, Montgomery has now gotten his musket, gets up on one knee, and screams, "Damn you, fire!" and discharges his musket into the crowd.
Oof. To be fair, he was probably concussed.
I mean, he
Like
probably wasn't
you just got
fully
rocked
aware
in
of
the
what was
head
going on.
with a rock
So,
and then a club. Like, good on him for being able to stand up or get on a
now,
knee anyway.
every eyewitness, for the most part, says that there was a pause after that first shot.
I mean, yeah, there's always going to be a small bit of alarm. Like, what the hell was that?
Now, there's a discrepancy whether that was several seconds or several minutes. But
Time's meaningless.
after a pause, there was, and this is very, very important, a very unorganized, not disciplined volley of the rest of the guns. So it was one gun bang, pause, and then pop, 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 pop.
So I mean, yeah, it's a chain reaction effect. Really, it's dropping a ping pong ball into a set of mouse traps with other ping pong balls. You drop it in, and bang, one goes off, and now there's two balls that come down, and bang, bang, and those go off, and then it continues because all the other officers, they're scared anyway. They don't want any part of this. They're standing there, and all of a sudden they hear a fire. And then crowds probably start getting louder, and then it's somebody else shoots, and this is what we're supposed to be doing now. Into 300 people standing directly in front of me when I have to reload after every single shot. Oh,
now this is where
bad spot.
This is where I'm 100% convinced that there's probably more to this story that we weren't entirely told. Because after the shots were fired, 7 muskets. There are 8 British redcoats. One is an officer. The captain does not have a gun. The other one's fired. So 7 shots. And 11 people get hit.
Well, I mean, these are high-tech ammunition that just pierces straight through somebody and can travel right through them, right? Like, I know bullets have entry and exit wounds, Tom. This is
yes, a bullet, even one of these musket balls can go in and out one person and injure another person. The problem is one of the people who gets hit and ultimately dies is somehow at the back of the crowd and allegedly got hit by a ricocheting musket ball.
Yeah, you know how they can bounce around everywhere until they hit your target?
Yeah.
It's like those old video games.
I'm going to go ahead and speculate here that there were probably a few colonials that may or may not have had a pistol or a musket and may or may not have also randomly discharged said gun into a crowd, considering a guy at the back of the damn crowd got shot.
So you're suggesting that these military men who were basically secondary not missionaries, militia.
Militia,
little bit different. Basically, also militia. You think they might have had something more than their single musket that was given to them? You think they might have also had a revolver or I guess.
Well, there's no revolver. So I'm just saying, I think that there was probably more than 7 shots fired at the Boston Massacre for 11 people to be hit. And given that some of those people that were hit were towards the back of the crowd, I'm going to go ahead and say that I would not be surprised if a colonial protester fired into the crowd.
Huh. Wait, you mean somebody who's there to counter protest that would want to instigate something kind of like a riot?
You're drawing a parallel that I'm not drawing.
Delegitimize? No. I'm just trying to understand the situation. Was this counter protester, if that's what we want to call it, if he's trying to draw attention to, is he trying to delegitimize their case against the
I am
government and the
just
taxes,
saying that
or
I find it dubious, Johnny, that somebody at the back of this crowd got hit by a ricocheting musket ball. That is all I'm saying.
okay, that's fair. Okay, hear me out. What if these well-trained British soldiers were so good and so efficient at reloading their muskets? I mean, you yourself have said
They
what
did
you
not.
can get 3 off at a time. What
They
if
did.
they shot one and it happened to in a Guy Ritchie-esque type film, method, just go through everybody and people were parting ways between it. Somebody raised their arm and it passed right underneath and it passed all the way through the crowd and hit that person in the back. I mean, that's another
That's some
scenario
luck. That's some luck.
that could have happened. I'm just
I,
looking at it from the other side is all.
yeah, it could have happened, and it also could have been equally that somebody at the back of the crowd fired a gun into the crowd as well.
Yeah, maybe that.
Whether that be a loyalist British subject who thought that these protesters deserved the comeuppance, or if it was a colonial protester who thought they firing at us, we got to fire back, and not
I mean,
and shooting into the crowd
also,
in defense.
since basically the entire city came to, what if it was just another one of these little northeastern misunderstandings we have, where we have a family feud and some dude's just like, oh, shots are fired, hate that guy. Like,
It could have been that.
the colonials did it. Like, I don't. What do you mean?
We will never know.
The world
Johnny.
will never know.
But after this misscattering of non-volley fire, even though the newspapers would have you believe that it was a volley fire, and our pictures that were shown in the school books said that it was a volley fire.
Oh, it was
fire.
straight up. They lined up in a line, like in my picture, in my brain, from what the English, American education system taught me, was they lined up in a line, and there were however many people marching up, and they just started shooting them.
That's
randomly.
Exactly how I remember it being taught, like in school. Like, it was like the British were sitting there, they told the crowd to disperse, the crowd didn't disperse, they were marching up at them, and they just fired into the crowd.
Yeah,
that is not
yeah
what happened at all.
It was taught very much like a don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes type, hold by this British, where they're like restrained and trying to not kill everybody, but they just murdered them in a very orchestrated.
The 3 civilians that would die instantly would be a rope maker, Samuel Gray, rope maker.
What a job.
A mariner, James Caldwell. He's just a fisherman. They have a lot of those in Boston still.
Yeah, that's a legit thing. I'm fine with that one.
And the leader of the crowd, Crispus Attucks.
Oh, the one who stood there with a bayonet to his chest and said, "Shoot me." He died?
Yeah.
That's weird. Did the guy shoot him?
I would hazard, if I'm a bed man, I'd say he got what he wanted. He got his wish. He got shot. Samuel Maverick, a 17-year-old apprentice ivory turner. Back in the day when we could take whalebone.
Yeah, well, and the
jewelry out of it.
The elephant tusk shipped in along with the slave trade, I'm sure, too.
Yep.
Had to create everybody's ivory trinkets.
Yeah, Samuel Maverick was at the back of the crowd. He's the one who got shot by a ricocheting musket ball. He died the next morning.
Guessing he was just an asshole that his neighbor wanted dead.
Probably.
That's my theory on that one.
And finally, Irish immigrant Patrick Carr would die 2 weeks later of his wounds. And we'll talk about Patrick Carr a little bit more in detail here in a couple of minutes, because he becomes a big key in the defense of these soldiers later on.
So he's probably one that something went straight through and then died of his wounds later.
Several weeks later, yeah.
Something like that.
There is a Christopher Monk who was seriously wounded and would die in 1780, and like his family's like, he was a victim of Boston Massacre. Like, you died 10 years later, dude. You really like.
I mean, yes, no. To be fair, he was a victim of the Boston Massacre. That was not the cause of his death.
No, it was definitely something else.
He was a survivor of it, and then he died.
Now, after the shots rang out, the crowd did what protesting crowds typically do in situations like that. They went, "Oh shit," and they ran away. They're like, "They actually fired at us! Get the hell out of here!"
Well, yeah, it turns out and especially in this case, you didn't have a bunch of folks going up there to start a revolution. You had people exiting their homes and businesses because they thought there was a fire.
Yeah.
And then they got mad and they're like, all right, fine, I'll join it. It's that group mind, group think type mentality that like prevent, we go stupid as a human.
Yeah, we do.
Like when there's large crowds, they start doing, it's that looking up experiment where one person, if you will go into like New York City, Times Square, or whatever, and they'll just look up, and then everybody else looks up. There's nothing to see. They're not looking at anything, but everybody wants to see it. It's that group mind, and it is monkey brain stupid.
Yeah. This crowd, however, doesn't completely disperse. They just go on to other streets where there aren't British redcoats with muskets pointed at them.
Sure. Party elsewhere, guys. Let's go.
Yep. Governor Thomas Hutchison is dispatched to calm things down, but the mob forces him into the council chamber of the State House, where from the balcony he's able to minimally restore order by saying, I promise, dude, we're going to look into this shit. We're not going to let anybody get away with anything. I just go home, and I promise people are going to get arrested.
See, I like details like this because it reminds me, like, you always see, mayors and stuff going up to their balcony and stepping out onto it and speaking to the town folk. And it just seems so far removed from any sort of reality. But, like, that was it.
That was it. That was it.
Ended up in a house, and he's like, well, I got to address all these people. He's like, so I'm going to go to the second floor, hop out on this balcony. We're like, guys, I'm sorry, everybody. But loudly because he doesn't have a microphone.
No,
or a megaphone.
This is the press conference that before press conferences. I mean, this is I'm going to order martial law before I give my press. Oh wait, damn it!
It's press conferences, but it's the press armed with stones and rocks and bottles.
In the initial aftermath, Governor Hutchison does begin his immediate investigation, and he does issue the order of the 8 redcoats arrest.
Wait, what? I'm sorry. I thought you said there were going to be parallels to today, Tommy. Are you telling me officers got arrested?
Just bear with me. First of all, I specifically said,
oh, that's right. There's not
no parallels.
Right. No. Yeah.
No parallels.
Which that makes sense now because these guys actually got arrested. And there was an investigation.
Anyway. They get arrested. These 8 redcoats, including Captain Preston, he is arrested. In addition to these 8 redcoats, there are also 4 civilians that are arrested who allegedly fired shots from within the custom house.
I have a little bit of a complaint. This crowd of 300 didn't kill a single British soldier.
No, they just dispersed when they got shot at.
Like, what are you doing telling them to shoot you if you're not going to retaliate against that shot and trample some people? Like, what? That's granted, it wasn't an organized protest, but it was poorly executed at the very least.
Yeah. Initially, afterwards, the powers that be would have a debate to remove the redcoats from Boston because they're like, well, this didn't go great. People are pretty pissed at the redcoats right now. Maybe we don't want them to die. Governor Hutchins is like, well, if we get rid of the redcoats, who's going to police our city?
And they're like, the Boston Police Department.
And they're like, yeah, if we keep basically the one of the commanders of the redcoats that were there, like, we're going to die if we stay in the city. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and retreat to the fort.
Yeah, we're going to bounce. Like, I don't want to just sit here and get murdered by your psychopath citizens. I would like to just chill and live my life.
There is a little bit of a power struggle on who actually has the authority to give the redcoats the right to leave. Like, nobody really knows who's in charge.
I mean, this is a big part of the problem and a big part of the revolution eventually. Like, how's England gonna govern us at all? Like, how can they do anything when they are? I mean, how long did it take to get from England to 3 months?
Yeah, it's a several-month journey at this point that you may or may not have survived. It's not like like at least one person died pretty much on every boat that came over. Like,
you get scurvy, you get season, whatever. But yeah, like, it's not an easy thing to do. And so, yeah, how do you enforce, like, if they're like, no, you have to stay in Boston? Well, fucking make me. Like, what do you mean?
Well, There is several final orders that are given. Basically, each commanding officer of the troops that are there say, "Yeah, we're done," and they all bounce to Castle Island, which is a fort that's a little bit outside of Boston.
I do like that name.
Things do calm down slightly once the British redcoats are not in the streets of Boston. Things
You
start to calm
don't
down a little bit.
say.
Yeah.
Once they stop being actively occupied, regular citizens calm down. That's
Now,
weird.
on March 27th, 1770, the soldiers and 4 civilians were officially indicted on murder, and the media on both sides began a propaganda war. You
On both.
have,
Wait. Oh yeah. I keep forgetting. Uh, that at this time there were so many crown loyalists to the
yeah,
crown.
well, and our education system does a shit job of teaching about loyalists. Like
Well,
they just
you don't think they exist at all because the entire story is they left Britain because they wanted their
yeah,
religious freedom and they came to the America and they had their freedom and everything was great and nobody was loyal to the crown. They all wanted the
like
revolution. Like that's what they teach you.
I'd imagine, and I don't know these numbers. I'm just guesstimating. I'd imagine it's about a 60-40. Well, I'd imagine it's about 40% are loyalists, 50% are actual like patriots or whatever, just getting caught up in the fever.
Yeah.
And then 10% are I really don't give a shit. Just let me farm my damn field.
Yeah, I would like to go ahead and just live my life, please.
Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and change those numbers. I'm gonna go ahead and say like 20% are I don't give a shit, and then like 20% are actual like we gotta fight.
Loyalists and then the rest are
The rest are
America.
loyalists. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, something along those lines. Like
Yeah, there
it's
is
really over exaggerated how many people were patriots.
well, and I think that's the real hang up is we think everybody in the United States had a like mind when it came to anybody from Britain, and that's not the case. Like there were people obviously that were loyalists and that defended the crown and defended the
I guarantee you, none of them were Irish.
redcoats. Well, yeah, yeah, they had their own thing going on where they were trying to free Ireland.
By invading Canada.
If it didn't go well, check that
It
out a couple episodes ago.
So the governor was very concerned about ensuring that these soldiers had a fair trial. Because if it's not a fair trial, the crown would be pissed off because, well, you just killed our soldiers for no reason.
Right.
If it's not a fair trial, the loyal subject, or not the loyal subjects, but the colonials that are angered would be pissed because, like, you gotta actually have a trial. Try them.
This country will have been built upon the idea of having free trials and all men
Law and order.
equally.
Yes, yeah.
So just
they were having
6 short years from now we'll establish those principles.
They were having a little bit of a hard time finding a lawyer that was willing to represent them. Because
happen.
If you find a loyalist to the crown, instantly the colonists are going to claim foul because
he can't
being
be
defended by a British. Yeah, how can you be fair and honest? You're defended by a Brit.
Yeah,
so
it's a problem we run into with juries, finding juries on high profile cases.
Exactly.
Is like the OJ trial, for example. Like people are going to have their biases. Like they all heard about it, they all saw it, they witnessed it happen, and then we're still going to let people with biases in and let them off the hook. But in any case,
yeah, during they would convince John Adams, the president, the John Adams, to represent the soldiers, and he knew right off the bat that my law career is going to be over once I do this.
Oh damn! I'm gonna have to run for president, aren't I?
Yeah, he knew that it was an uphill battle because your jury is going to be selected of the same
people,
mob that
folks who live here. Yeah.
Did this. But he believed in law and order. That's the one thing I do love about John Adams. Now, his defense is a little, but he believes in law and order. And he believes that everybody has a right to a fair trial. So everybody has a right to a fair defense, fair and competent defense.
So at his core, he has that very base trait that you want in any lawyer, judge, or jury member, really, of people deserve to be heard, have their side told, and get tried as a person.
Exactly.
Not as somebody who's been brought in as, now this motherfucker murdered these people, now let's sentence him.
Yeah.
Let's hear it out and let's give him a trial.
The very first trial, there's a series of trials that happens. The very first one is for Captain Preston because, well, he's an officer and we can't have that officer sitting in a jail cell forever.
Oh no,
So
you got to get him out, get him back into his comfort. I mean, he was occupying somebody's home for
right,
crying out loud. Now
yeah,
he's
he's
in a
gotta get.
jail cell. That's insane.
So so his trial kicks off in October 1770, and it's a pretty easy trial for him. Like that's the easiest person to defend. The only way he could be convicted of murder is if he gave the order to fire. He never gave the order to fire, so he was acquitted pretty easily because
I mean, that's
he gave
fair.
the order
Yeah,
to fire.
he didn't do anything. He didn't say fire. He didn't say anything.
On November 27th, the soldiers, the rest of them, the 7 guys, they would be tried.
Uh-oh.
Adams' defense, like I said, for Preston was easy, but for the soldiers, it's a little bit different. Different. They did. There's no doubt every one of the guns went off, so every one of them is responsible for deaths. Now, his argument
Yeah.
basically focuses on several parts. First, it is their duty as a soldier and a guardsman to. This is their castle. This is their post. They have the right to a reasonable self-defense. If
Right.
they reasonably believe that their lives were at danger, they have a right to defense. And through that self-defense, they cannot be tried with murder, but only at the most manslaughter.
So it's Florida's stand your ground law.
Yeah, yeah, basic. Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, in as a best of a comparison, yes.
Their job is to protect an area. If that area is in danger, they are allowed to fire their weapon, essentially, in
So
order to protect it against that danger.
that's his primary core defense, which is a good defense. It's fast.
So he's looking to go from murder to manslaughter, basically.
Basically, yeah. But when you start, and I love John Adams, and I thought he was a flawless person, which was stupid of me because I know everybody's flawed.
Yeah, no one's flawless except for me and you.
And when you start, yeah, and when you start reading his quotes and his speeches during the trial, you get a little flavor of the time.
Yeah.
And so what John Adams was essentially trying to do is paint the crowd in a less than favorable light.
Yeah. Yeah, you
and
make
claim that
the other side monsters.
They were just this monstrous group led by a black man.
Ah.
And I mean, it's only a black man and his followers that died, so what's the problem?
Ah, yes. That's the uncomfortable bit, huh? That whole, it's just this, let's belittle this entire crowd, entire city of people because it's being led by just a black man.
This is one of the quotes.
What does he even matter?
This is one of the quotes during his speech. He refers to the crowd as a motley rabble of Southsea boys, Negroes and mulattoes, Irish teagues, and outlandish Jack Tars. I don't know what half those words mean, but I do know the mulatto and Negro part, and that's all you really need.
No,
the rest of it is whatever.
Even without knowing the actual meaning of most of those, I could put some things together. But you just know none of those could be used today.
Part of the key to his victory, though, is that one of the prosecutor's witnesses, he gets to admit on stand that, yes, in fact, he was carrying a sword to the fight. And yes, in fact, he was carrying that sword with the intent of cutting somebody's head off. It got the guy to admit, basically, and this isn't quoted, but he was like, yeah, I probably yelled at the crowd, cut his fucking head off! With sword in hand. So that was pretty key into showing that, yes, this crowd was in fact threatening.
Yeah, it was quite the violent mob, not just a group of protesters. Okay, that's yeah. If you have people with actual swords calling for your head, that's I can see where your self-defense switches in your brain might start flipping on.
So in his end speech, he basically gives the whole facts theory. Like, yes, you might empathize. And by the way, John Adams was also chosen, I forgot this part, but he was chosen specifically because he was anti-taxes. Like, he was anti all these laws. He was outspoken about it. He was a patriot. He was this idea man of formulating those early ideas of independence.
Yeah. An early true American.
The colonials couldn't accuse him of not being on their side, and the crown couldn't accuse him of not being a competent defense because of how he was handling everything. So he was a true middle guy at that point.
Yeah, he played the middleman well.
he argued the facts. He says the facts during the trial is that there was a mob attacking the soldiers. There's no getting around it. They were yelling for the soldiers to fire. They were hitting the soldiers. They were striking them with clubs. There's a guy with a sword going, cut his head off!
When the start of it begins with some dude getting rocked with a snowball with probably a rock in it and then clubbed over the head with a billy club and then another attempt at a clubbing, you have a hard time defending the fact that the crowd was hostile.
They were physically struck. The soldiers were physically struck, and that there was no order ever given by the commanding officer to fire.
Those are facts. Yeah.
He does his closing statements. 2.5 hours takes the jury to deliberate. Ooh,
that's short.
Not looking great for the soldiers.
that's about, real quick.
That's about the time it takes to give them the death sentence. And this is what we also don't learn about in history class very well.
Yeah, like I never knew anything that happened after it or the results of anything. All I learned about was that it happened and innocent, God-fearing Americans were killed. Even though America wasn't there, but you know what I mean.
Wink.
Like,
on all counts of murder, every single soldier, not guilty.
Not guilty.
John Adams, in a jury of their peers of a bunch of pissed-off colonials, gets a not guilty verdict.
And you wonder why he was able to get himself a presidency.
Soldier, right? 2 would be charged with manslaughter, one of which being Private Montgomery. Was that the one who fired the first shot? He's the one who was clubbed and said, "Damn you, fire!" and then fired the first shot. Like, yeah, probably. Yeah.
So the guy who got attacked potentially fatally twice and then returned fire was charged with manslaughter.
And then Private Matthew Kilroy, who was essentially also found guilty of manslaughter because he aimed his musket.
You can't aim it.
You can't aim it. And I'm exaggerating a little bit on that. Like, I couldn't find a lot of details on it, but like the best parts that I found were that he knowingly and intentionally fired the musket into the crowd. Which
so he
aimed is the only thing I can think of because everybody fired the musket.
Well,
so how do you prove that one fired into the crowd intentionally and one didn't?
Like, I think my guess would be that like maybe witnesses saw him single out a person and pretty much point blank.
Crispus Attucks?
Yeah, that might have been it.
He might have been the guy with a bayonet to the chest.
Yeah.
Although Adams does try to blow that up and like say like Crispus Attucks was like grabbing the musket of the bayonet and like trying to manhandle it. Although a lot of witnesses put Crispus Attucks actually without arm's reach of the gun when the gun went off. But
so here's the thing: you're gonna have a hard time defending a dude that's saying "shoot me."
There is that. Now, the jury would actually report that they were mostly convinced of the non-guilty of murder, primarily based on John Jeffrey's testimony. He's the Irish immigrant who was shot and would die 2 weeks later.
Okay.
And John Jeffrey's. This is 2 really remarkable parts of this case. The first is that he dies before the case happens. But
I was going to say that seemed really quick to have him like testify on his deathbed.
His testimony is admitted through his surgeon, who was there at the time, treating him.
So he admitted to a bunch of stuff or talked to somebody, and then they were.
And it sets the precedence for basically deathbed confessions.
Yeah.
If a person who's on his deathbed who knows that he's going to be dying says something, it is admissible in court without cross-examination because he or she knew he was dying. It is a reasonable confession, and obviously they can't, testify to something after their death.
Well, and the idea there being they know they're dying, they have nothing to lose, and so they're going to tell the truth because they are trying to salvage themselves in the eyes of God, probably.
Yes. So John Jeffrey says essentially that he was an Irish citizen and then immigrated to the colonies. He said he has seen riots in Ireland, and he has seen on several occasions redcoats firing into crowds of rioters. He said, on no occasion have I ever seen British soldiers take more abuse from a group of people than at the Boston Massacre before firing.
Yeah.
He goes on to say, I have no ill will to whomever it was that shot me because I know that they were only acting in self-defense, essentially saying that, yeah, we got out of hand and we kind of deserved it.
Yeah. So kind of the argument there being like, you can only poke a bear so much.
Yeah.
Like, poke the bear, and he's saying these British soldiers have been very, very patient bears up until now, but eventually you're gonna poke that bear somewhere, and it's gonna piss it off, and it's gonna start fighting back.
It's like the reason it is reasonable to assume that if you were in the British Redcoats' shoes, you probably would have fired too.
Oh, well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, people forget about it. And of course, every British redcoat is an expertly trained soldier who has spent years and years and years learning how to put up with abuse. But that's not the case. It's fucking kids sent over there, and they're being abused, and they're being attacked, and they're having things thrown at them and everything else. And they're probably fucking terrified. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
like,
Now
I've never been in the center of 300 people or so
that are mad at
yelling
you,
at
but
me
I get
and
it.
being angry at me, but I can put myself there, and it's not great.
The two that were convicted of manslaughter would actually escape the death penalty by pleading a benefit of clergy, which essentially allows them to say, yes, it's like a plea deal. We plead guilty. We understand that what we did was probably not the most couth. And their punishment then is that they are branded on their thumb with an M. Hot iron branded with an M.
Yeah, on
That's
their
their
thumb?
punishment. On their thumb. So
Okay,
that way, if they commit any crime in the future, including theft
yeah.
or whatever, that M would remind a jury that they were convicted of manslaughter and could result in the death penalty.
Ah,
So basically, this is your get out of jail free card. If you ever fuck up again, where you deuces, you're out.
I've got two things. First, that is basically the 3-strike rule that we have in place today, where if you get arrested 3 times or whatever, it's like they throw the book
yes.
at
For
you and
drugs.
you're a
For
felon.
drugs. That's only for drugs.
Is it? Yeah, whatever. But in any case, basically that. And also, we just threw around the death penalty for things like manslaughter back in the day.
Everything was essentially the death penalty back in the day. It was like, the death with them. You
if
stole
you
a horse?
did anything
Hang
wrong,
them.
string them up. We need some entertainment in a show. Because that's what it was. That's why they had it, right? Like, so that people
pretty
can
much.
gather around and watch people die, because people at their core are fucking sick.
Yeah, we're awful people. Yeah. Those 4 civilians, they were tried on December 13th, Johnny, largely on the testimony of a servant who said, yeah, I saw him shoot. That testimony was easily thrown aside. All 4 civilians were acquitted of all charges, but the servant, who I'm sure was not black at all.
No, definitely not. Yeah,
The servant.
I mean, servants were of all kinds, creed, and color back then, right?
Yep. He was found guilty of perjury, whipped, and then banished from Massachusetts.
You know how I know he was black? Because they fucking whipped him first.
And then banished him.
And then banished him from Massachusetts.
Your name is Toby.
My God.
And that, guys, is a more clear picture of the Boston Massacre, which has no parallels to anything that happens today.
I'm so glad we
stories and only hearing one side of a story and people getting away with murder. And
so glad we learned from history. I love it.
Never happened again.
All right, that's it for this week's episode of Historics Hindsight. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review, and join us next week when we start to find the worst person in the world.
That's right, Johnny. It's our special, probably 2-month-long trek to try to find the worst person in the world, where we compete people like Hitler, up to Stalin, up to Pol Pot. And next week is a specifically special episode. We're actually going to have a couple episodes probably per week when we do this. But next week is really special because both of our wives, we are not gay at home, guys. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we're not gay at home. We actually have wives. They're going to join us when we get to pick who is the worst serial killer to play in to that whole who's the worst person ever.
That's right. It is a bracket challenge. 16 of the worst people in the world compete to find out who the worst actual human being was. Next week will be our serial killer play-in bracket challenge. So very exciting. Join us for that.